I had a sense that maybe I can't survive. One of the leaders of the church said, Paul Conn will either be the shortest presidency in the history of Lee or the longest presidency in the history of Lee. And somebody said, what do you mean? They said, well, they're going to try to take him down early. You know, he's going to have to learn quickly to adapt to church politics. But if they don't get rid of him in the first couple of years, he'll be so entrenched and he'll be hard to ever dislodge. So like if they're going to get him, they meaning the critics in the church, they need to get him early. So that was quoted many times. So I knew that there would be this problem of surviving.
You'll hear me from now on out preaching the cross of Jesus Christ.
My father was a Pentecostal preacher. He was very intelligent. He was very well read. He was kind of an anomaly. He came from a poor, lower middle class background, working class background in the Atlanta area. But he was very bright and had a very refined taste in reading, music. He thought deep thoughts. I've rarely had a deep thought that I was aware of. I'm more of a pragmatist. I'm a problem solver. But my father was a really, not just an intelligent guy, but if he had been in a family where he'd gone to college and grad school, he would have been an intellectual. He was bent in that direction. My mother was from Alabama. They met at a little Bible college, which was the precursor to Lee University, a school called BTS, Bible Training School up in Sevierville, Tennessee. I was one of 12 children. It was a wonderful childhood. I loved growing up in that big family, and I miss it. My family moved to town from Missouri. They had this big family. They were totally obsessive about education. The last house before the railroad tracks, it was a little 2-bedroom wooden house. I grew up there from the age of 2, which is when I moved to Cleveland, until about 8 years old. That house is no longer there. It's now been torn down to make room for the parking lot of the North Cleveland Church of God. And we walked to Arnold School from over there. I had 2 older brothers, and I would ask Dad, why'd you wait and name me Charles? And he said, I don't know, son, I just never felt like it was the thing to do with your brothers, but when you were born, I felt like it was the thing to do. It gave me a great sense of being special, and I liked that. So I knew a couple of things. One, I was going to try to make my dad proud that I was the second Charles Conn. Second thing is, if I ever had a son, he was going to be named Charles too. So I did have a son, only one son, and gave him the same name. So Dad was Charles William, I'm Charles Paul, my son's name's Charles Brian, and his son is named Charles Oliver. There was this subcultural thing. We were members of the Church of God, we were Pentecostals at a time and in a town when that wasn't cool. Almost none of the people in the church I grew up in were college educated. I can remember when we would remark about a particular person from our faith getting a college degree. That's how rare it was. We were marinated in church life. The church was extremely important to us. We walked to a local church here in town. We never missed a Sunday morning or a Sunday night. Wednesday night was prayer meeting. We never missed that. Friday night was the youth service. We never missed that. See, right there, I've named 3 nights of the week that I was in church as a child, all the way through and a teenager. Church meant a lot to me. So the subculture of our church was a powerful influence in my life. So I grew up in this town feeling that I was part of a underappreciated subculture, Pentecostal Christian. And so I think our whole family felt that, and the way my parents responded to that was urging us to be better, to achieve more. You had to be better than most, you had to overachieve in order to achieve, you know. That's exactly how I felt growing up. I felt I will be discounted and dismissed unless I am demonstrably superior. My senior year I played tennis, I loved tennis. The church I grew up in didn't believe in wearing shorts. Our church taught that it was wrong to swim with both genders, you know, so typical pool party or a beach party with boys and girls was not allowed. So anytime we were allowed to swim, guys swam at one time, then they would empty the pool and the girls would swim. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's how it was. So I played tennis in long pants, but I was pretty good. At the age of about 13, I won the city tennis championship wearing long pants. So I qualified to go to the state tournament. I was thrilled. I pleaded with my parents, please let me buy a pair of shorts. I knew, here in town locally, okay, there were a lot of Church of God folks wearing long pants, but I knew if I went to this state tournament, it was going to be all the country club tennis players. And I was going to show up and walk out on a tennis court in a pair of long pants. I remember the night that I sat down with my parents and said, please let me buy a pair of tennis shorts so that I can go to this state tournament with some kind of self-respect. And I was rather surprised when they said, okay. But they said to me, don't become accustomed to this. That doesn't mean you're going to come back home and play in shorts on a regular basis. Now this sounds like Never Never Land, doesn't it? Early on we read. My father, who was not college educated, had a library of 7,000 hardcover books. He might flinch at hearing me say this. He bought books when we didn't have enough money for any extras in the groceries. No reason he'd flinch. He'd say, you never went to bed hungry? Of course we didn't. I always fed you? Yes, of course you did. But if you could buy powdered milk instead of regular milk and mix it with water and you have a pitcher of milk and save $1, which you could then spend to buy a book or a record of classical music, that's what we did in our home. So true, we never went to bed hungry. We were well fed, but that's how my father acquired all these books. So I loved to read from a very early age and read all kinds of stuff, and I wanted to be a writer. My childhood hero was Ernest Hemingway. He was famous, he was wealthy, he was a great artist, he traveled, he made love to beautiful women, he engaged in big boisterous parties, he drank a lot, he played a lot, he loved a lot, he lived this big life, and that I kind of associated this with being a writer, and that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I started working very early as a kid. I started with a paper route when I was about 10. I had a paper route for about 3 years. I then graduated to bagging groceries and carried them out. Didn't like it. And then I got a job writing for the first time. It was a revelation to me that you could write and get paid for it even when you were in high school. I knew that people in this town loved little league sports, kids sports. And I would pick up the Cleveland Daily Banner every day, and it would have these very sparse accounts, a little more than the scores. And I would go by these little league fields and there was all these parents. I went to the Cleveland Daily Banner because I was a paper boy there. I went inside to the news department one day and said, what if I wrote Little League Baseball, summertime, as if it were like Major League Baseball? If I wrote it for you, would you pay me for it? And the sports editor said, well, yes. Let's see what you can do. So I went out to the Little League Park. I sat there just like I was a regular reporter. I scribbled some notes down. I came back into the Banner office early the next morning, and I sat down at one of their typewriters and typed up an account of the Little League baseball games from the night before. They loved it. They realized this was a winner because all these parents out there, they would rather read about their son hitting a home run than Major League Baseball. So they made a deal with me. They said, you write Little League Sports, and if we print 8 column inches, you'll get $2. And that's what I did for 2 summers. And I really developed in that time an appetite for writing for money. I thought all the way through high school and my first couple of years in college, I wanted to be a journalist. I had a very close friend. We edited the school paper out at Bradley High School. Senator Kefauver was the Democratic nominee for vice president under Stevenson in '56. He was a nationally famous senator. I got in touch with him and asked him if he'd write a guest editorial for our little high school paper, and he did. I was a very high-achieving high school kid. I never made a B after my freshman year. I had college board scores through the roof. I got an excited call from the high school guidance counselor at Bradley High School saying, "We have somebody here from Yale and they're looking for talented, outstanding young students from this region, and I want you to come down to the guidance office and meet this lady." And I did, and I was very complimented by the idea that I could have gone to Yale, and it was just laid out there for me. I had a similar thing, University of South at Sewanee, very elitist. I liked the idea of going to these places. My older brother, had gone to Berea College in Eastern Kentucky. I actually applied up there, got accepted, got a dorm assignment. But my parents really wanted me to go to Lee. And they made this, it wasn't a rule for us, but it was a formula. They said, go to Lee for 1 year, just so you can make some friends, see what it's like. That's kind of the way you would doff your hat, tip of the hat to your background. Then you can go wherever you want to go. So I did that. That's how I went to Lee. It was satisfying, that desire to show my loyalty to my family, to show I wasn't ashamed of being Pentecostal, white Appalachian kid. But after I'd been there a year, I just really liked it. Looking back, I realized it was low-grade stuff, it was like 600 students, but I liked it. So I stayed a second year. I liked it even more. I wound up staying. I was denied some scholarships because it wasn't an accredited 4-year school. It was accredited as a junior college, and some of those scholarships that I applied for, it said you have to go to an accredited 4-year college. One of them was right here in town. It was called the Magic Chef Scholarship. It was the most prestigious scholarship in this little town. Magic Chef was the biggest industry in town to make stoves and microwaves. They had a big scholarship, Magic Chef Scholarship, and it was only given to one graduating senior from high school. So this is a high status thing. I won this scholarship. When I said I'm going to Lee, I was informed you can't get it to go to Lee because it's an accredited 4-year school. I remember being told this by the assistant principal of the high school. "Sorry, Paul, but you can't go to Lee and keep this scholarship." I said, "Who can change this?" "Well, we can't change it. It comes from Magic Chef." "Somebody somewhere must be able to change this. This rule was made by somebody. It can be suspended by somebody." And this legendary assistant principal of Bradley, who's revered in Cleveland, she said, "Well, I guess the president of Magic Chef could change it." I called Magic Chef and I asked for an appointment with the president of Magic Chef, a man named S.B. Reimer. And they gave me an appointment. He thought, as I was later told, I was coming to thank him for the Magic Chef Scholarship. And he gave me the appointment because he thought, this is so nice, he's a nice young man. Not everybody thinks to do that. He got the scholarship, he wants to come thank the top guy. So I got in to see him. I said, "Mr. Reimer, thank you very much." He said, "Congratulations, I understand you're the winner of the Magic Chef Scholarship." I said, "Yes, I am, but that's why I'm here." I kind of baited him in a way. I said, "I want to go to the school of my choice." He said, "Of course so, that's why we have this scholarship." I said, "I'll tell you something else. My high school English teacher, Mrs. Fitzgerald, everybody knew Mrs. Fitzgerald in Cleveland. Yeah, oh, what a wonderful teacher, I said, you know what she told me? It's the best thing I've ever been told in high school. When I was talking about choosing a college, she said, 'Young man, follow your heart.'" And Mr. Reimer said, "Yeah, that's great. Oh, Miss Fitzgerald, what a wonderful." I said, okay. You're telling me I can go to the college of my choice. She's telling me to follow my heart, but my heart tells me to go to Lee College, and I'm being told I can't get your scholarship if I go to Lee College. I want to ask you to reconsider that, because it seems to me that's kind of internally inconsistent. If you want me to follow my heart's telling me to go to Lee. And I'm told, you and only you can give me a waiver. Would you please let me follow my heart? And he said, "I guess we could do that, The conventional path says, If you can go to an Ivy League school, go to one. If you can't go to an Ivy League, go to a Southern Ivy. If you can't go to a Southern Ivy, go to a good state university. Follow the path set by others. I thought, this is so individual. It's so particular that other people can't write a cookbook for you and say, this school will make you happy, or this school will even make you better educated. So I decided I'm going to stay at this little college, I'm going to graduate, then I'm going to go to graduate school. And the test will be, can I get into a good graduate school and can I compete when I get there? Started as an English major, freshman and sophomore year. That's back when I thought I would be a writer. They didn't have journalism, so you take English. Then switched to theology. It was a junior college and a Bible college. It was primitive in many ways in the landscape of colleges and universities. But there were some very talented people there. And I had the good fortune of meeting them and being in their classes. One of them was Don Bowdle. To this day, high school, college, grad school, PhD, postdoc at Harvard, I've never met a better teacher than Don Bowdle. They had one Greek club at Lee, kind of an informal fraternity. It's called Upsilonic C. All the cool guys got in Upsilonic C. I got here as a freshman. In those days, you could get in this club immediately. And I watched for a couple of weeks, and then they invited me to get in Upsilonic C, and I didn't quite like the vibe. So I was sitting around with 2 or 3 of my friends. Say, oh, you going to get in Upsilon? Did they invite you, Conn? Yeah, they invited me. What about you? Jerry, yeah, they invited me. And what are you going to, I don't know. I said, let's just start our own club. They said, can we do that? Can you just go start your club? I said, yeah, I think you can. What are they going to do? Somebody's got to give you permission. I went to the president. It was a guy named Ray Hughes. And I said, we want to start a new club. Tell me how to do that. We drew up a charter. We developed a patch, the colors, the whole thing. We created Alpha Gamma Chi out of thin air. I was wrapped a little tight, probably. I edited the yearbook. I was determined to make it the best yearbook we'd ever had, and it was. I lived at home, Old Ellis. I lived there a lot, but I was never officially enrolled there. But the dorms weren't filled in those days, and you had a lot of guys without roommates. You could poach. I was a squatter. So if I was asked what's dorm, I'd always say Ellis, because I could always find a bed to sleep in there. I really, really admired this president. He was there the first 3 years I was there. His name was Ray Hughes. He was a young guy, he was dynamic, and I saw him take on the establishment, the Church of God establishment. Very strong personality. I really admired him. I remember one episode with him. We had snow. Well, it's unusual in Cleveland, Tennessee, but this time we had 5 or 6 inches of snow, good snowfall. We were all making snowballs on campus and throwing them at one another. I saw President Hughes come out of his office and walk across like he was going toward the dining hall. I made a snowball and threw it at him, and remarkably, my aim was good, and I hit him right in the side of the head with a snowball. He looked around, saw me, and said, "Come here." He grabbed me by the rib cage. And he was a strong, tough guy. And he kind of pulled me up by my rib cage, and he said, "I want you to go over there and there, get a shovel, and I want you to shovel all these sidewalks all around here. And then maybe I'll forget you hit me in the head with a snowball." And you know what I said? "Yes, sir." And I went and got a shovel and shoveled the sidewalks. And I frequently wondered, I said, why did I do that? Why didn't I say to him, "Dr. Hughes, in all due respect, sir, you can't tell me to shovel a sidewalk. I don't work for you." I immediately acquiesced because he had such a sense of command and authority. It never occurred to me, do you have the right to require me to shovel a sidewalk? Darlia was a missionary's child. She's from Western Canada. So she has this kind of Western prairie toughness, resilience. Life can be hard on the plains of Saskatchewan and Alberta. Long, cold winters. She was born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So she grew up there till she was 8 years old. Then she went to Africa and lived from the time of 8 to 18. So she's got this really unusual background. She came to Lee and I met her. I had been here 1 year, she came a year later. straight from Africa. She was a piano student. She was an excellent pianist. She had something the rest of them didn't have, in my opinion. Now, you know, that's what makes a good marriage, doesn't it? You think your wife or your spouse has something the rest of them don't have. Not love at first sight, God knows. I think it's a myth if there ever was one. And I remember seeing her when she first arrived on campus. She was kind of an exotic bird because all of us good old Southern boys. She was from South Africa and Canada. She was announced as the new accompanist, pianist for the lead singers. I was in lead singers. So I'd heard about her. Yeah, there's a new girl coming, going to be the pianist for, oh yeah, where is she from? You know, what about her? Well, she's from Africa. I remember hearing about her before I met her. And I remember being attracted to her from the very first time I saw her. And we became friends. We were both in this choir together, the lead singers. We dated kind of off and on until my senior year. I do remember our first dates. You know, I was ambitious. I took her to a Peter, Paul, and Mary concert in Chattanooga. That was cool because it costed a little money. I had to get the tickets. That's pretty good. You know, people didn't do that a lot. We drove out to Harrison Bay, a lake near here. I pulled up by the side of the water. I turned off the car. I said, Darlia, will you marry me? She said, yes, I will. I said, great. We turned the car back on, we drove back home. That's how I proposed to her. Then it became a more serious thing. We got married immediately after graduation. As a 17-year-old, I felt a sense that my life must be spent in service to God. The way I think one serves God is by serving other people. And you can do it in so many different ways. And the reason I went into psychology is I thought I would be a counselor, a therapist, a clinician. That's a way to serve God. That's a way to minister and to be a minister. So I went to enter graduate studies in psychology to try to learn how to be a therapist, a counselor. I would be a Christian counselor. That way I could sit across the desk from people like you and me, and I could hear their problems and help them work through their problems. That would be a wonderful way to serve humankind, and by doing that, serve God. So I went to Emory University, and I was admitted to their psychology program. I did that first year, and I took a job at a psychiatric clinic in Atlanta. I would frequently do the intake interview. I was doing this that summer, and I was miserable. I was totally unhappy. And it must have shown because the director of the center, who was a psychiatrist named Jim Mallory, said to me one day, Paul, are you happy? I said, no, I'm not happy. He said, well, how unhappy are you? And I said, well, sometimes on the way to work, I fantasize having a fender-bender. Not a big wreck where somebody gets hurt or, God forbid, killed. I'm not nuts. But I will sometimes think, if I just kind of crunched into the car ahead of me or somebody came in, and then I wouldn't have to go to work. Whoa. Even I realized how pathological that is. He said, we need to talk. We had a long talk. He was very helpful. He wanted to know, why did you get involved in psychology? Well, two things. One, I love the analysis of human behavior. It's kind of a Rubik's Cube, And the other thing is, I want to serve people in Jesus' name. I want to minister. He asked me, why don't you like coming to work? And I said, because when I'm asked to sit across a table with somebody, I feel fraudulent. I feel like they're paying their money, they expect me to help them, and I don't think I have the tools to do that. He said to me, what you want to do is fix people. I said, that's right. He said, it's absolutely the wrong basis for being a therapist. So I went into developmental and experimental. Well, then how do you serve God doing that? Well, through teaching, through working with young people. So after I got out of grad school, I was offered a job back at Lee College to teach psychology. It seemed strange to me. I really still felt a lot like a student. I was only 25 or 26. I had had offers to teach at other colleges. I thought I might go to one of those. I thought I might go into some conventional kind of ministry. I had started to realize that I wanted to write, and had started to write, but I didn't really think of that as a full-time career yet at that time. I like college students. You know, I was a youth pastor for 4 years while I was in grad school, and I loved it when I started. I thought teenagers were interesting and clever and complex enough to hold your attention. By the end of my 4 years, I didn't even like teenagers very much, you know. I didn't think they were interesting. I thought they were silly. I didn't think their problems were, were worth spending time on. Just grow up. I was kind of bored with teenagers. I remember when I came to teaching college, I thought, I wonder if this will be the way I feel about college students 5 years from now. Is this a kind of a developmental pattern where I'll no longer take pleasure in college students? Well, that has never happened. So after 50 years working with college students, I really still enjoy college students. They're just advanced enough to be interesting. And so I don't dismiss their problems as being trivial. As a species, as a category, I like working with college students. I care about the development of young people into balanced, independent thinking adults. That's really what I care about. You know, my PhD was in developmental psychology, so I've studied human development and have an interest in it academically. You take this very primitive, this somewhat whimsically, this very primitive organism called a 17-year-old, and by the time you finish with that at 21 or 22 years old, 4 or 5 years later, it's quite a different organism, if you will, let me use that word. Well, what happens in those years is really fascinating to me. And that's what college is. It's a laboratory in late adolescent development. I had my little cubbyhole office, 203B in the Walker building, tiny office. I occupied that office for 14 years. For 12 of those years, or 10 of those years maybe, my father was president. He never came to that office. I went to his office frequently. We got along fine. There wasn't a sense of estrangement. He was just, had a sense of protocol. He did his job, I did my job. We would go long periods of time without interacting at all. I thought he was a very good president. I felt a little defensive on his behalf whenever he would be criticized. I was teaching psychology. I was writing books. I wrote at least a book a year. Actually wrote about 20 books in 15 years. They were commercial, pop. They were totally unrelated to my discipline, so I wasn't writing books about psychology. I was mostly writing as a kind of a freelance nonfiction co-author. Then I would travel all the time, either to interview or to make speeches or do media interviews in support of the books. I remember one time I did a book with a fellow in the Netherlands. He was a guy that smuggled Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. They had a phrase for him, they called him God's smuggler. His name was Hanne Fonterbiel. He was called Brother Andrew. I got a call from a publisher saying he wants to write a book about the plight of the church in restrictive regimes in Africa. He lived in a little town called Harderwijk, which was, 1 hour train ride from Amsterdam. I literally wrote that book by traveling back and forth to Amsterdam once every 3 weeks for a semester. Think about this now, I'm teaching a full load, which at that time was 15 hours. About every second or third week throughout that semester, I would teach all week, I would run for the airport, I would get on a plane in time to get the transatlantic and all the night flights. I'd go to Amsterdam, with absolutely no sleep, get up, get on the train to Harderwijk and go spend a day and a half, 2 days working with him and get on a plane and come back home. This sounds kind of strange, but literally I would walk out of the class, seeing everybody, and I'd walk back in on Monday morning and everybody else is talking about how, I went to Chattanooga, ate at the Western Sizzler, or man, I had a big week. I went to see the Big Orange play football. So I was doing projects like that every year. I went on talk shows. You remember Larry King? He did a late night talk show nationwide on Mutual Broadcasting. I went on that show a couple of times. I did the book with Bradshaw. I did the book with Johnny Cash when he was at the height of his popular appeal. Jack Eckerd, started Eckerd drugstore chain. I did want to write fiction. I've tried a novel a time or two, but it never got out of my, my middle desk drawer. I even signed a contract with a publisher one time to write a novel and took an advance. It was a small advance, but I was writing all this nonfiction stuff. And so this publisher said, why don't you try a novel? Okay, I'll try a novel. I said, I don't have any idea what to write about. We'll sign a contract with you. You write a novel, no deadline. Whenever you get it finished, we have it, we own it. It was a $10,000 deal. So, okay, I've signed this contract, I got $5,000. Whenever I deliver an acceptable manuscript, I get the next $5,000. I never delivered this manuscript. Many years later, I tried to give the money back to this publisher. We were just trying to make sure if you did write something that was good, we would own it. But keep the $5,000. Vanessa Hammond is our oldest. Heather's the next, and she lives in Florida and is a K-12 public school teacher. And then Brian is our son. I loved every stage of my children's lives. I loved them as little kids playing around on the floor. I began to miss their childhood by the time they were teenagers, then I'd miss their teenage years. I worked very hard and I was gone a lot. And the only regret I have about any of this is that many, many times I was on the road or I was working. I mean, if you write a book every year and you're teaching full-time load at Lee, and not just teaching, but doing all kinds of other things. I sponsored Bendagua, I sponsored Clarion, I've directed the Parade of Favors for a few years. I did a little of everything. Then what you do is you come home and you eat dinner, and pretty quickly you go to the study and you close the door and you start working. So if I had been a novelist, so I could have sat in my study and written, that would have been one thing. But if you're a co-author, so if you're going to go to co-author a book with a guy in Holland, you got to go to Holland. Kathy was one of my biggest books. It was made into a CBS movie. It made all the major bestseller lists. But that was in Phoenix, and I had to go back and forth to Phoenix consistently. So DeVos was Grand Rapids. Nicky Cruz, I did his book. He was living in Dallas. Then when I did these books about Amway, people were scattered all over, so I would have a list of like 20 people I needed to interview, and I literally one weekend, and this was stupid, but it's what I had to do. There's a guy living in Fort Lauderdale and another man living in Seattle. So one weekend, I left here on Friday, I flew to Fort Lauderdale, I interviewed him, then I flew to Seattle, interviewed that guy, and then came home. And I would take my kids with me whenever I could. I took one of my kids with me to Larry King, and she was so sweet. We stayed in a downtown hotel in Washington, D.C. Larry King was on like from midnight to 2 a.m. Take her up there, we have a nice dinner, we go up to the room, we're sitting up in bed eating popcorn and watching TV. And I told her, okay, honey, I'm here to do a radio interview, so I'm going to leave and go do that interview, but don't worry, there'll be a babysitter here, you'll be fine. Okay, so she went to sleep. At 11:30, whenever the babysitter shows up, taps on the door, hello, Mr. Conn, yeah, okay, it's a girl right here, her name is Heather. She's sleeping, I hope she'll stay asleep. Babysitter stays there for 3 hours. I come back in at 3 a.m., I pay the babysitter. She leaves, I crawl in bed with my daughter. Later in the night, maybe 4 a.m., she wakes up. She sees me lying in bed right where I was at 11 o'clock. She panics. She shakes me awake. Daddy, Daddy, she's crying, literally crying. You missed your interview, Daddy, you went to sleep. I'm so sorry you went to sleep, you missed your interview. Now that's one of my sweetest memories of her. She was so sound asleep, she didn't realize I had gotten up, got dressed. Babysitter comes, sits there in a chair for 3 hours. I go and I'm on radio from California to Maine, come back, put my pajamas back on, crawl back into bed. Salt Lake is a big book town. So I went to Salt Lake several times, but I went out there one time and took the same daughter, Heather, with me. We were going to this big convention in which there were about 25 or 30 members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and I was the guest speaker, and I had told them I was going to have my daughter with me, and it was going to be her birthday. So we go in there, they sing happy birthday to her. She comes back to school, we're doing the deal where she's about a third grader. What did you do over the weekend? So I says, I played in the yard. Somebody else says, I went to Lake Ocoee. Sweet little trusting, innocent Heather says, I went to Salt Lake City and the Mormon Tabernacle choir sang happy birthday to me. And the kids all hooted and, didn't believe it, of course, and the teacher didn't believe it. And of course, the teacher got in touch and said, just want to let you know something happened. Heather's a sweet girl, but she has a really vivid imagination. And she told the students, the Mormon Tabernacle choir sang happy birthday to her. So you just need to know about this. These fantasies are getting a little, well, I said to this teacher, lady, it's absolutely true.
Liu Paul Conn style. Liu Paul Conn style.
I'll tell you why I got the mustache. You look at some of the earlier pictures, I don't have a mustache. When I came to teach at Lee, I didn't have a mustache. I have bad skin in that I have a skin that's prone to rashes and so on, sensitive and tender skin. I got a chronic rash on my upper lip as a result of shaving. So if you've got a rash and you put shaving cream on it and scrape it every day, it's never gonna get better. So I was always going around scratching my upper lip, and I grew the mustache one summer so I wouldn't have to shave. And so my skin wouldn't be irritated, and it worked. I no longer have a rash. And I intended to shave it when school started. So I started at the beginning of summer, thought I'm not gonna shave this summer, grow a mustache, see if it'll help my skin clear up, and it did. So then when time came to school to start, I just stuck with it. As you can see, it's turning gray. Now it's the way that I can demonstrate that I don't color my hair, because that's the other deal I get asked constantly. And some people don't believe it. I don't because you're 78 and you still have mostly dark hair, very little gray hair. So I say, look at my mustache. If I were going to color, darken things up, don't you think that I'd have this gray mustache?
Is Jesus Christ the only way? And increasingly, the answer I fear that young people are receiving is, well, I'm not sure. Obviously, if we reach the point that the answer to that question is, I'm not sure, then we have no more creed, we have no more faith.
Teaching, writing, speaking, I was making enough money that I was giving my salary back to Lee. The board knew about all these things, so they're casting about. President Conn resigned after 12 years, that was in '82. President Hughes came back, he resigned after only 2 years. And they're kind of, okay, what do we do next? School was going down. We had enrollment losses for 4 years in a row. Financial problems, had the first year of a deficit budget. Things were troubled, in other words. There was a feeling of, look, instead of just bringing these Church of God preachers in here, up to that time, every president of Lee had been a big name Church of God minister. Why don't we kind of take a chance and ask a member of the faculty, like, what about Conn? It was a crazy idea, wasn't it? I wasn't a vice president, I wasn't a dean, I wasn't even a department chair. I was sitting in my little office teaching psychology classes, running off on weekends. But amazingly, the board voted to make me president. They interviewed me, they called me in, the search committee, they liked what they heard, they selected me as president. Well, the church leadership went berserk because I was totally outside the model. And at that time, it was a part of the charter of Lee that the executive committee of the Church of God had the right to veto the choice of a president made by the board of directors. And they had never exercised that right, but they did that time. So they vetoed me. Well, everybody in town knew it, everybody on campus knew it. I was president-elect for about 24 hours. I was embarrassed, I was angry. But this guy, Lamar Vest, he's the person they had anointed to be the president. They were angry that the board didn't accept their suggestion. But Vest came on to be president. Well, I liked Vest. As a matter of fact, I thought of all the options available out there, he would be a good choice. He was young, he was progressive, He was my friend, and even though I was angry because I had been rejected in such an open and direct way, I liked the idea of his being president. So he came over there, and after a couple of months, it just wasn't working for him, and he came to my office and said, "Please be my vice president." So I said yes. I served with him for 2 years as vice president, at which point he got elected to one of these big Church of God jobs. Now they need a president again. Well, they didn't waste any time that year. They, within 30 minutes, they had an emergency meeting of the board, elected me president again. This time, the church did not veto me.
It has been said on several occasions that this presidency marks the passing of a torch. Some have observed that in a certain sense, I represent a new generation of leadership. And it is natural that some should wonder whether the Lee College flame will burn as brightly or as purely in the hands of this generation. Let me pledge to you, on behalf of all those others whom I represent, that you are passing the torch.
I was confident I could do it. I didn't know if I would enjoy it, and I didn't know if I could get done the things I wanted to get done. So I had a sense that maybe I can't survive. One of the leaders of the church said, Paul Conn will either be the shortest presidency in the history of Lee or the longest presidency in the history of Lee. And somebody said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, they're going to try to take him down early. He's going to have to learn quickly to adapt to church politics. But if they don't get rid of him in the first couple of years, he'll be so entrenched, and he'll be hard to ever dislodge. It's like if they're going to get him, they, meaning the critics in the church, they need to get him early." So I knew that there would be this problem of surviving, but I also had been on that faculty for many years. I knew the faculty. I felt like I could do the job. The same ones that tried to block me from being president in the beginning, they did try to go after me, and in the first 6 or 8 or 10 years, they challenged me on lots of particular things. Christian rock was just coming in. Well, I loved rock and roll. And this guy named Milan had one of the first of the big Christian rock groups. So we invited him to do a concert at Lee. And it was a huge outcry because he wore an earring. It was hard rocking. They dressed like rockers. And there was this big attempt to try to force me to cancel that concert. Milan came and he had the concert, and the sky didn't fall in, and kids didn't immediately run out and start engaging in devil worship, I started loosening the rules somewhat. Girls had to wear skirts on campus at all times. It's hard to believe that, but that's true. So I changed it and said, well, okay, the girls can wear slacks or jeans or whatever. Another big one was the seal. I didn't think this was an attractive seal, so I changed it. And it hit the fan when I made that decision. And in those days, the Church of God preached forgiveness but didn't practice it very much. And there was this feeling once you had erred and you'd had a moral failure of some sort, you would never fully be restored, certainly not restored to a position of leadership. And I challenged that by bringing to our team from outside a couple of cases, bringing people in at a senior administrative level who had been engaged in widely publicized misconduct at an earlier stage in their lives.
What scripture would I want you to read if you could read just one scripture? It would be Ephesians 3, that famous prayer of the Apostle Paul. And I've marked in the front of your Bible, "I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the saints, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ.
This is the first year I was president. We didn't have a commissioning service. I created a commissioning service, and the reason was everybody gets the caps and gowns, they go to all this effort, they march in there, they get their diploma. It seemed like we ought to hang on to this, do a little more here. So we created that Friday night commissioning service. You know what gave me the idea for the Bibles? I went to a commissioning service in the Mormon Tabernacle. As a matter of fact, I was doing a bookstore tour, so Sunday morning came and somebody took me to the Mormon Tabernacle for the worship service. And that happened to the morning. They had about 200 young missionaries, commissioning them to go out to their assignments. And they gave them all a Book of Mormon. And I thought that's really cool. And so when I became president a few years later, I thought, okay, that's why we call that the commissioning service. So I said, we'll commission our graduates. They're going out tomorrow. We'll give you a diploma and you'll graduate you. But tonight we're going to commission you to go out as salt and light, citizens of the kingdom of God in the world. And I wanted to give them a Bible. And that's when we'll get their names and emboss it. And then I thought, well, this is kind of personal, so I'll sign it to them. And this scripture, Ephesians 3:16-19, we're so heavy on the judgment, so heavy on the duty. And Paul says, if you would have power, not power to follow the rules, not power to understand the theology, not power to save the sinners, power to grasp how high and wide and long and deep is the love of Christ. Power to get the love, feel the love. Not power to do, power to feel, I've always thought that's the single most, to me, most profound scripture.
People have asked me, were you born in a coated tie? No, actually, I was born naked.
I grew up in a Christian home, of course. In adolescence, I began to have real doubt about all of it and went through a period of doubting that any of it was true. I think I would either be a committed evangelical Christian or I'd just be totally non-theistic, or an atheist as some people like to call it. I'm kind of an absolutist in the sense that I gravitate toward this very facile and almost superficial idea that it's either true or it's not. And when it comes to matters of faith, I think it is either true or it's not. My junior, senior years in high school, really challenged with this question of, is this real or is the whole thing not real? There was no in between for me, in a sense. And I came to believe that it was real. Only at one time later in adulthood did I entertain any serious concerns about my faith. And I think it's perfectly legitimate to inspect, analyze, discard, reject any manner of religious practices. But when it comes to actual faith, I think it's hard to be in the middle somewhere. It's such an outlandish, extreme, radical thing to say, I believe there's a God, and I believe that God has the kind of, the level of interest that he knows about individual, like 8 billion people on the planet. He knows about each one of us individually. That's really, when you just stop and think about it, that's way out there. And that he not only does, but he is capable of and occasionally might intervene in the life of that individual. But that's really basically what we're saying when we believe in prayer, that somebody's listening. I think once you commit to the basic idea that God is real and that he expressed himself historically through the person of Jesus Christ, and that God is kind of granular enough in his activity that he cares about particular individuals. Once you go there, none of the rest, you're just quibbling over the details, you know what I mean? Faith is a presumption. It's a set of assumptions. It's accepting a set of theories about life because it can't ever be proven or objectively validated. if you begin with the presumption that God is not real, there's not really a God, there's no there, then you've got a lot of explaining to do. And it seems to me, you eventually hit the wall in trying to explain natural law, order, lawfulness, order in the universe. There is natural law governing so many things. Some parts of life are chaotic and random, but others are not. So my question finally came down to, what's the source of that lawfulness? And I swear for the life of me, I can't understand really bright people who will come to that last question and say, I don't know. And I remember the first time I went to Harvard for a one-year postdoc. I was in my mid-30s. So I thought maybe there's a higher level of reasoning at a place like Harvard. That first year I was there, I would sit around and listen for some compelling idea that would challenge my sense that God is real, and I just didn't ever find one. I think believing in God is intellectually as defensible as believing in no God. And believing in God has a lot of problems. You know, there's a lot of holes in the fabric, you know, it doesn't explain everything. But believing in no God, in my opinion, has even more.
I've been living for God since I was a teenager, but sometimes I have to get on my knees and put my forehead on the floor and say, God, I am a sinner. Please, by the blood of Jesus Christ, forgive me of my sins.
You know, I love preaching in chapel, but it always puts me on edge. I've never got totally comfortable with it. And it's not performance anxiety. I've preached 500 times in that chapel. It's a sense of responsibility, and it's an anxiety to get it right. And the last time I preached in chapel was 2 weeks ago, I guess, and standing up there for the 500th time, I'm still a little nervous, you know, because I think it's really, really an important pulpit. I go into local churches to preach, and I look out there and I realize these people have been coming here and listening to preachers preach for all these years, and they hear the same stuff over and over, and all they want to do is, as I heard somebody say once, beat the Baptist to the buffet. There's nothing like this sense of importance. Because I've sat there in that chapel as a student, I know how impactful it can be. And I've heard the stories of many, many other students. And I believe those kids, even if they're made to go to chapel, are in the crucible in a way. And I think the potential impact of a chapel sermon to a Lee student is far greater than a dozen Sunday morning messages at a regular church. You tend to remember the crises, the Ellis Hall fire. That is a feeling that won't leave you. This occurred in 1993. I was in Germany. I had been speaking at a U.S. military event. The dorm burned in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. That means it was already 8 a.m. in Germany. And I was scheduled to fly out later that morning from Munich to Atlanta. A couple of the people there in the meeting that I was in saw it on TV. It was on CNN. And of course, they wanted immediately to notify me. But one of our staff who was over there protected me from it and had a fierce argument about whether I should be told or not. And her instinct was, he's already at the airport. He's about to get on the plane. He's going to be in the air in 9 hours. He can't do anything while he's in the air. Why tell him? Why not give him 9 more hours of blissful ignorance? And like I said, there was a fierce argument about that. The other, no, he would want to know. It's ridiculous for him to not even know this dorm burned. Fortunately, the woman who felt I shouldn't be told prevailed. and I wasn't told. When I got off the airplane, waiting there was one of the vice presidents who had gotten permission to come out to the gate, and they had a private plane out there at the airport because it was an emergency. They took us, put us on that plane. We were in Cleveland in 45 minutes. That's how I got told. I came off the plane. I remember this guy saw me in the door and said, "It's not your children." Now, he had good instincts, didn't he? He knew if I saw him, I would immediately think one of my kids, you know, there's been a tragedy. Somebody's been in an automobile accident. Why would they send somebody to meet my plane in Atlanta? Not your children. There's been a fire at Lee. Nobody's dead. That's what he said. 17 boys in the hospital. 4 were airlifted to Chattanooga. I remember the first student fatality we had when I was the president. 2 young girls were killed in an automobile accident. Coming back to campus one night, I went to both those funerals, one in Florida, one in Ohio. I remember I was just wiped out by it. I was just gutted by it. And it was the first time we had experienced that on my watch. I remember being kind of startled at how deeply it affected me. I still am shaken by it. I'm the president, so I feel responsible. I've always had trouble sleeping well, sleeping through the night. Typically, I'll get up somewhere between 5:30 and 6. I read newspapers online, Boston Globe, New York Times, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Chattanooga Times Free Press. I love having breakfast meetings. I think it's an efficient way to work. My kind of default quitting time is 6:30. That's my arrangement with Darlia, that I'll come home at 6:30 if we're going to have an evening at home.
But first, to start us off this evening, we're going to welcome our first special guest, the president of the university, Dr. Paul Conn.
Most evenings there's an evening event. I work through to that event, which might typically be starting at 6:30, 7:30, then home.
I'm sorry, question of the week. You're welcome to add something to it if you want.
Sure, I'll answer this question. What are you perfectly legal?
It's a good answer. It's a good
It's
answer.
not only legal, it helps your career, you know. It doesn't make your wife happy.
I have a style, management style, leadership style, in which I like to talk with the people at ground level. You know, I'm not a good hierarchical delegator. So you got 6 vice presidents, and you only deal with the vice presidents. Those vice presidents have assistant vice presidents or directors and on down. So for a hierarchy to work most efficiently, you would only work down one level. I've really never been comfortable with that because I like to talk to the people who are closer to the work. So I have lots of meetings. I like to go to the person's office. I don't like sitting in the president's office and having everybody come to you. If I only met with vice presidents, life would be a dream. But the idea, and I've seen many leaders that lead this way, that you stay with the chain of command, I just don't think it yields good information, because at every layer you run into the human factor of insecurity, paranoia, credit taking. You would have to really have a very good understanding of every person in the system to know when that's kicking in. It's just easier to go to the source. I enjoy politics as a spectator sport. You know, Fox News and CNN, they're next to one another on my satellite system. So I can just sit there and with my thumb while I'm driving, I can flip back and forth. So I love following politics.
Hi, Governor Coda from Georgia, running for president. I want to ask you to help me next year.
The last campaign I ever actually worked in was Jimmy Carter. I liked Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was a Southerner, and I liked the way he talked about his faith. I was the treasurer for his campaign just in this area. I was asked to run for governor by the Democratic Party of the state of Tennessee. They actually came here to Cleveland, a delegation, because there was an incumbent Republican who seemed to be a cinch for re-election, and they were really looking for a sacrificial lamb, in my opinion. So I said, why me? Well, we've heard a lot about you. You're a rising star in Tennessee higher education. Yes, but I was nowhere near having the potential for a successful statewide campaign. I don't think it was really serious effort, but it got in the papers, unfortunately. Most of my friends are Republicans, and if you're a college president, you spend a lot of time trying to raise money, and those people are all Republicans. I don't consider myself a Republican or a Democrat. Fortunately, in the state of Tennessee, you don't have to declare yourself.
Why are all your ties so short? Ties aren't short. Ties are just ties. You tie them long, you tie them short.
I've borrowed every idea I've got. Asked the president of the chapel, you know where I got the idea of that? From Rich DeVos. I was working on this book with Rich DeVos, and I was traveling around just hanging around with him. He has something called Speak Up for the employees. Now, I'm not talking about Amway distributors. I'm talking about the people that work on the factory line. He lets every employee come in there. They do not do the submit the questions because he's bolder than I am. But he goes up there and just says, okay, I'll take your questions. And it's like a press conference. Some Yahoo can raise his hand and ask anything. Now, I thought that was so cool because he was willing to deal with such fine-grained, small matters. He stood up there for an hour and did that, and I loved it. And I never forgot it. And it was at least 10 years later that I became president. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do.
We probably have 300 or 400 questions. We don't have time to read all those. But lots of students asking about lots of different things, so let's get started. First, I was wondering why we do not have a trip board where students can post that they're going over break to see if people want to go with them or help with gas costs. Very good idea. We've never had one of those. Putting one up in the post office right now.
Leadership is in short supply and great demand. If you're young and you've had measurable success, you get a lot of people wanting you to come do that at their place, and I had a lot of those. I was only tempted once, and that was a state university in Michigan, because I had friends on that board. Rich DeVos was one of them. He got it in his mind, I need to come be president. Well, this is a state university with 25,000 students. I was really tempted at that because I admired DeVos so much, and he'd given so much to Lee, and he really got it in his mind that that's what I needed to do. I was asked twice to be president of Oral Roberts University. Once by Oral Roberts. I learned why Oral Roberts was so successful because I had no interest in Oral Roberts University. He invited me out there to be his commencement speaker. I got out there and Oral takes me into his office the night before, and he's got his dean and the chairman of the board there, and he says, I'm going to be retiring in a year. I've been praying and I've been thinking, thou art the man, he said. Had no interest whatever. But I learned how hard it was. I didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to tell him no. Now that's a powerful skill to have, to be the person nobody wants to say no to. I wasn't tempted to go be, because Lee was on a roll and I wanted to make Lee what I wanted it to be. But there have been others, numerous Christian colleges. In a lot of that, there was an implicit judgment about Lee that I resented, because the assumption is I would be stepping up to their college. And I knew by then I'm not stepping up. Why would you think I would come be president of your college? We're better than you are. I wanted it to look traditional. And I've seen some of these new campuses that grow, they build things cheaply and it looks cheap and it looks temporary. We're here to stay. I want these buildings to look permanent. I think we are serious about this fusion of excellence and Christ-centeredness. And there are not that many schools, in my opinion, that are truly serious about both of those things.
Well, how you doing, Darlia?
Yes, sir.
You ready to rock and roll for Jesus?
There's some things I'm proud of. One is the Global Perspective Program, international travel. I sat there for years thinking, man, I wish we could do that. I saw the schools did it. We put that international travel program in with the Cambridge program at first. I'm still very proud of the Cambridge program. In 35 years I've been president of Lee now. I think one of my best moments was when I first went to visit that Cambridge group, and I'm seeing all these Lee students in Cambridge, enjoying the environment, a part of that. The building of the chapel. I love that little chapel. So that's something I'm proud of.
All right, if you had somebody, an anonymous donor, because I know an anonymous donor, could you get rid of the tickets?
I think students like me in that limited way that you like authority figures. College kids, if you'll just treat them with some kind of courtesy and respect as you would a friend, they like that. And I think one reason is they don't get so much of that. Typical 75-year-old doesn't really interact with these college kids in a way that assumes a kind of intellectual and emotional parity. So when an old guy comes along who genuinely seems to enjoy talking to them, they like that. So I don't have to fake that. I really do like them.
Well, some have said I am the model of a college president, a trendy one that is for sure, but I have a religious bent.
The sun is shining, the Lord is blessing, the givers are giving and the students are studying. You can, you will, you must celebrate with us. Listen, we have new mountains for you to climb. Amen. For you to climb. Amen. For you to climb. Are you best alive? Are we almost there yet? No. It's okay to stop and ask. Are we almost there yet?
Y'all give it up, you know the deal. That mustache is rocking and you know it's real. If you want to ask the president, go right ahead. He'll stand up and chop and get your question read.
Don't look now, Dr. Conn is right behind you. I heard cats have Conn-like reflexes. I heard that when Dr. Conn cries, the eternal flame goes out. It's never gone out.
I heard Dr. Conn has plans to build 8 more buildings this year. You think that's true?
I bet you $1 he has a new building built before the end of the day.
I've probably got 20 or 25 cartoon figures, the mustache, the Papa Con's pizza, Paul Conn t-shirts. They play on the word Conn. I've got so many, and at different times, they all feel that they've kind of invented this thing. They don't realize that 10 years ago somebody was doing this, they were just using a different version of it. I enjoy that. I think they don't take it seriously. I think it's a way for students to engage with you in a kind of a playful way. There's a kind of almost self-mockery. I mean, we're going to act like this guy's some kind of celebrity, but we all know we're just having fun with it.
How many of you have seen Three Amigos? Three Amigos, maybe one of the best all-time sources of profound knowledge and information in the history of cinema. Three Amigos. Right up there with Princess Bride. Yeah. Cool Hand Luke. You never seen Cool Hand Luke?
I remember when I first came to Lee and started teaching, I thought of myself as like their older brother. And they would tell me that sometimes, I'd remind them of an older sibling. Well, as I was 25 and they were 19, of course. I felt like their older brother, and I would say sometimes, I'm old enough to be your older brother. Then I got to where I would say, I'm old enough to be your father, because I was. And their parents were about my age. Now, for the last few years, I've been thinking like their grandfather. And I think they look at me like their grandfather. I'm becoming too old to be their grandfather, because, honestly, I'll hear them talk about their grandparents, and frequently their grandparents are younger than I am. So I think, good Lord, where's this headed, I find it easy to pray a lot. I just naturally pray a lot, and one reason is I am a supplicant. I gravitate easily to help me. I feel stress all the time. I've talked to other presidents who don't feel this. Their deal is that's somebody's job. I'm a micromanager. That wears on you. There's no question about it. And I think particularly Darlia absorbs that pressure too. Darlia and I have always talked about the 10 years after I'm president. And got to where we called it her 10 years. She said, when am I going to get my 10 years? So I figure if I quit when I'm 70, I got the years from 70 to 80. Then when I went to 74, the question is, will you get out early enough that you've got a good long post-presidential period? That's what we've hoped for. And we know that's in the hands of the Lord, and who knows, you know, but we felt like we wanted to have a period when we're still healthy enough to travel and enjoy life together. So I don't want to stay any longer. I enjoy it, I do it with all my heart. I don't hold anything back, but I do know that the clock is ticking. And even though I'm in good health, think about it. Think about what 80 sounds like to you. So if I'm going to have a period of years in which I can write that book on leadership or write memoirs or take Darlia and go to interesting places we've never visited before, and, you know, I'm going to be lucky. I'm going to have to stay healthy up into my 80s. I want to be remembered as someone who was willing to do whatever was necessary to make things better.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer.